Hello, friends. Welcome to Banking Frontiers. My name is Manoj Agrawal. I'm the group editor at the magazine. Today, we are having a panel discussion on a very important topic, emerging hyper opportunities and how they can be tapped using new thinking, new technologies, new approaches, new solutions, and how can they be made swift and scalable as well. I have four very interesting people with me whom I would now request to introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Anup Dhingra. I'm responsible for financial lines and specialities as well as private equity and M&A at Marsh in India.
My name is Mahesh Arigaran. I work for Blue Prism, the intelligent automation leader in the space. I look after the India financial services sector business with focus on Indian enterprises and global captives also.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Robert Dewar, based out of Sydney in Australia, and I lead the Asia Pacific financial services business and industry line for Blue Prism. So look forward to the conversation.
Hello, good afternoon all. This is Yatish Shivaprasad. I am from Societe Generale Global Solution Center. We are a French investment bank based out of India, but manage two geographies, which is India and Romania for all the group IT. Thank you.
My first question is going to be on a topic, customer experience. How do you see the back-end systems, the core systems evolving in a way so as to improve customer experience? And core systems generally tend to be very heavy. So how are you seeing the transformation happening there? Is it slow and steady, or is it like a big bang approach? What kind of approaches have worked at the back end to improve customer experience?
I'm happy to make some comments from our dealings with various customers across the region and some of our global clients, given our guests here today are global entities as well.
Yes.
And what we've seen is, as you've quite correctly said, a huge demand for agility and new functionality at a much more rapid pace demands from the customers or the partners or the agents of financial institutions.
Mm-hmm.
And that's being driven by a couple of things. One, the user experience. These people are no longer comparing bank A with bank B or insurance company A with insurance B. It's about their user experience with mobile apps, whether they're ordering food or rideshare, taxi, or entertainment or social media. That's their comparison.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things with intelligent automation that is so powerful is with RPA and the digital workers that we have in our customers, is we can actually do that back-end integration between the front-end app and the, let's call it the legacy applications, without any changes to the back-end, which is the holy grail. Now, many clients are modernizing the back-end, and you typically need your best subject matter experts out of the business. Yep. And some of your best IT folks. Well, if we can put digital workers in place to do that repetitive work and free those people up to go and do the modernization, we've seen that happen, and the ROI and the business case for that has been tremendous in many of our clients. So it's not necessarily a long-term solution for multiple years. In some instances, clients have kept it, but in others, it could be, for 1 year while that modernization takes place. And the RPA intelligent automation is not a single silver bullet. It is complementary to APIs and some of the other technologies that are being used. And it's not one single silver bullet that does that.
Yatish, you wanted to add something?
Yes, I think the way we look at it is a holistic view of the end customers. We are a bank, of course, we are an offshore center here, but when you look at our end customers, what do they look at and how do we make the journey very pleasurable for them? So we identify what we call as customer journeys, and anything that we do, we put customer at the center. We call it as client centricity, right? Mm-hmm. When you put customer at the center, then you will see how you are able to maximize the experiences of the customer, the end customer, which brings in the elements of customer experience automation, which it is not a single bullet point. Yes, it is not, because, it also means how we make the entire IT extremely agile to be able to satiate all the customer needs that is arriving at. Because, with the onset of the digital transformation wave, one, and secondly, the environment around us changing so drastically in the last 2 years,
Mhm.
given the situation that we were in, has demanded our IT systems to be re-looked at and to be rethought about and reimagined. Which means we really have to be very agile to move our systems to be able to address those client needs.
Any practical experience that anyone would like to share?
The biggest issues that we see as an intermediary is that the systems, the backend has to be agile. That's what Yatish mentioned, Robert mentioned. More importantly, it has to be future ready. So, like you said, a lot of things are changing. Customers are not just expecting to compare bank A versus bank B. They're comparing ourselves to consumer tech firms, etc., etc. So the backend has to be future ready. We have seen this thing in our firm because our firm has been very acquisitive, although it's a 150-year-old firm, but we have grown through acquisitions. And every time we acquire a new company, and the last big acquisition we made was 2 years back, about $6 billion or so. Every time we acquire a new company, we acquire a plethora of legacy technologies that don't talk to each other. So one of the biggest call out items from my side would be, from a future ready perspective, from an interoperability perspective, and from a perspective that, how we can, do data transition so things don't fall between the stools, especially in regulated industries like banking and insurance. Our regulators ask us to, hold on to client data for 10 years. And if we drop things between the stools, we have a problem not only on customer experience, on record keeping, but also on regulatory compliance.
I think we touched those key points, right? I mean, we heard from all of them. It's interoperability, and it's not a silver bullet, intelligent automation that way, right? But something that we all, at least I can comment from the Indian banking and insurance companies, right? I mean, I think over the last 3-4 years, there's a lot of transformation which has really happened, right? Customer centricity, like we spoke about, right, is becoming part of the boardroom discussion, right? So that's a very positive step that we see. Most of the decisions around it, but one thing that we have traditionally in India has been legacy debts, right? I mean, there are applications which have been built over time. Interoperability issues have always been there. There are multiple technologies which did come in. But I think now, the focus on straight through processing, with competition coming in, from different quarters, I think people are aware that, the customers' interest levels and priority levels change. So how do we as an organization are able to quickly respond to it? And I see a lot of uptake in the automation space. It's maturing. It's just not task automation that people now talk about, more of helping our daily tasks, but it's really about achieving straight through processing, and how quick are you to respond to changing market needs. So I see a lot of that happening over the last 2-3 years in India. I thought I will give that perspective from the Indian FS accounts as well.
Yeah, that's true. Let's move to another issue, agility. So how do you see large organizations systematically becoming more agile in terms of people, process, technology, structure, data, all those kind of things?
Definitely, in today's world of agility, because we are facing not only competition in terms of how we offer the best-in-class services and products for our end customers across the world, and we are competing with many different types of banks. The banks, it's not the traditional ones. We have completely virtual ones. We have the payment companies, which are actually translating into banks. We have fintechs coming in. There are quite a lot of disruptions if you really look at the banking industry. So what has our company done to really keep up the pace? What we are seeing as emerging in the market. Firstly, we had a very nicely structured internal startup program that we conducted nearly 3 years ago.
Okay.
As part of this, we encouraged our staff. We covered nearly 150,000 employees all across the globe.
Wow.
As part of this program, we were able to build our own groups of 5 to 6 members. We identified certain business problems that we want to tackle with, and how we can propose few ideas. and how these ideas were actually nurtured. We had nearly 2,000 ideas across the organization, which was rolled up, brought it down to 120, which was reviewed by the general management team, and post which 12 of such ideas, and I'm speaking about India in particular, were picked up to really be translated as startups. And these were the internal startups within the organization. So what did we achieve by doing this was first to identify very quickly some of the solutions that we can propose to business problems, right? And then there was the general management team of the group who is putting their weight around to make this as a success, which means we're able to quickly translate from an idea to a POC or an MVP to really a working solution. And this is something that was backed by the CEO himself, which is the Mr. Federico Dia. Right. So if you really look at it, this is one which way where we will help the organization also to start seeing how we can bring about agility. There are many such examples. For example, in 2018, we have a division which is called as Global Markets, which ran an incubator program. And as part of this incubator program for all the market activities, we gave an opportunity for the startups. I'm speaking a lot about these startups. The reason being, they bring in with them the agility. They will also work with the organization for a certain duration of time to help the organization become more agile and move towards a solution very quickly in a very short span of time. I'm just giving you two examples.
Right.
I can give you many, given the time I restrict myself. Thank you.
Fair enough. Those are good examples. Anup, what is your approach? You are acquiring companies, and companies come not only with different technologies, like you mentioned, and data and products, but also different cultures and different way of doing things. Does the integrated organization try to standardize everything, or try to keep the best of everything, working as parallel systems, parallel cultures maybe? So what do you standardize and what do you let it be the best of breed?
Question, Manoj. Number one item that we standardize is things which are related to regulatory compliance. So there's one organization when it comes to regulatory compliance, record keeping, client confidential data, that's kosher and that's non-compromisable. One. Two is that, when there are things which are related to client experience, as far as possible, we want to have, in fact, that's a very big holy grail for us to create consistency of experience for clients. So that's point number two. And this is just my take. I'm not speaking on behalf of the organization. I'm just giving you what I see. Point number three is there are some items which are colleague facing. Things related to travel portals and expense claims and so on and so forth. Those things, about hiring and about colleague onboarding and all of those internal platforms that we have. And for all practical purposes, we have a very happy motley crew of those people, those applications which run. So in order of priority, what is important for us is regulatory compliance, client confidentiality, our commitment to clients under contract and to regulators. Number two is our consistency of experience to customers. Number three becomes, things which we acquire, some things we retire, some things, happily coexist, some things whittle away. But having said so, I'm just going to pick up with what, Yatish mentioned. The firm has done a lot of crowdsourcing of ideas as well about, what could be the future be. One, two is that, it's a very interesting thing that, as a large organization, as a very storied organization, which has a massive market share, we work with close to 92% of Fortune 500 firms as clients. We are worried about getting disintermediated out or disrupted out of our market. So one is that, we keep an eye on, we have a Silicon Valley Center of Excellence. We have centers of excellence in Shanghai, in India as well. We keep an eye on what these new, young, disruptive technologies could be, right? And some of them could be disruptive to our clients, because when a client asks us, what technology do I use to manage flexible benefits on healthcare, right? We should, even if we don't own it, we should be able to point it to the client that, here is something that you may want to try. So we keep an eye out on some of those things. And I work with that center very, very closely. And that's something where we don't either buy them or try to buy them or acquire them or compete with them. But sometimes we can refer our client for a holistic set of solutions, even if we don't provide them. One. Two is that, we also monitor disruptive technologies which could disrupt us and out of business. We are an intermediary, right? So those are consumer facing technologies or direct to customer kind of technologies, etc. So that's a very interesting area that we kind of do this thing, and there's a whole team which kind of checks out these things too.
Okay.
Three is that sometimes we have to buddy up with people who do this thing better than us. So it's very important. I think the call out item I have over here is very important to know what you're good at, and strategy is all about knowing what not to do, instead of what to do. So from a strategic perspective, many times we will choose to either we're a big company, we want to buy or we can build it up to scale, but it takes time, effort, money, and we are not the best in building up to scale. We're a fairly large, stodgy company, with due respect. But it is easier for us sometimes to buddy up with someone who can do things better than us. And most of the times, this is carriers. So if there's a white label insurance product which is there, or there's a white label platform which is there, where we can buddy up with them, have the client have an experience, but at the back end, it's linked to various insurance companies, or the supply side, areas and all. I think it kind of does the trick. So I think one of the biggest items as a wrap up from my side would be that we can't be everything for everyone. Knowing what to do and where to put our efforts, energy, money, and resources is one item. More important than that is knowing what not to do.
I think Robert wanted to add something.
The 3 points I had have just been talked about much more eloquently than I could by these two gentlemen as real case examples. But your question about the DNA of big banks changing, particularly around agile, we've seen significant investment from very large organizations like these two, plus in the region like DBS, CBA, NAB, ANZ Bank have all made very significant investments in training their staff, changing their IT lifecycle and governance, creating tribes and deploying agile. And the two drivers that we've seen there is exactly what you said, potentially rather than acquire, to partner with. And they've all either made investments in companies and fintechs. And if you're going to do that, you have to truly understand and embed agile, because all the fintechs, that's their DNA. That's how they operate. And the ones that haven't succeeded are the ones where you have that clash of the fintech culture versus the large legacy bank. And we've seen that change rapidly. So
how do you see an approach that doesn't make human skills the bottleneck? How do you institutionalize intelligence that is sitting in the human mind into the system? What has been the approach, or what is the thinking that might work in the coming years ahead?
RPA as a technology is widely deployed, and I think most of our audience know that. But what's happening, and it's closely linked to exactly the problem that you defined there about scarcity of resources and retention of key people as well. So RPA has evolved into intelligent automation, which encompasses AI and machine learning, and encompasses the ability to listen and learn and process. And it really is important that the deployment of that as digital workers to complement and supplement rather than replace our human workers is key. Because what we're doing is taking away the repetitive, the mundane, the not interesting processes, and we're also taking away the complexity. So you take some branch-based systems, or contact centers are a prime choice, where in some instances the poor agent has 6 or 7 systems they have to log into, flick between. Well, the digital worker can do all of that, pre-fetch the information, create a calculation, and then provide that agent with meaningful information that they can then have the personalized conversation with the client with. So I think that goes to your question of, it's not about replacing, it's about enhancing and supplementing that. And when you add that to the advanced analytics and insights with data science, your propensity modeling and next best sell and the more advanced analytics, and this is really all being facilitated with the migration to cloud of many of the core systems that facilitates the scale up and scale down, as well as the availability. So that's just some of the things that we're working with our clients across the globe, and in particularly in this region in Asia Pacific. We're seeing some great business cases that are being deployed, and then actually measurable returns in that. In a number of instances, particularly in a contact center, we're seeing 30 to 50% reductions in average call times, while the customer satisfaction as well as the agent satisfaction is going up.
I just wanted to say a few points. There are two ways of looking at the question that you were putting across, Manoj. So there are two things that encompasses your question. I will answer the second one first, which is the way we look at. You rightly said, putting people where we can make the best use of the human talent, right? So in not in the mundane work that we do on a daily basis, not in the operational processes, which has got a clear defined SOPs, which the process, the human talents are actually invested on various of the processes today in the banks, in the big banks like us, because we do have a lot of those type of activities specifically around the middle office, the control activities, the compliance activities, and even the HR operations. It's a clearly defined SOP. You have to follow to the T like that. Right. There, technologies like RPA, even hyper automation is something which comes handy. The other thing we as a bank would also be looking at is how to make it quicker, nimble, agile, is to look at solutions which are low-code platforms or even no-code platforms, where it will help us to reach a level of preparation. When we talk about data, analytics around data, just to give you an example, how we can bring in this platform so that they would help us to give some insights to begin with. And depending on the way you would want to articulate your strategy, it could be a business strategy, it could be an ID strategy, to leverage the data and the analytics around it and the usage of such platforms to help us make decisions better. So there we can go much faster. Here, when we look at such platforms, the dependency on human skills per se, the dependency on developing a large-scale solution or a bespoke solution will reduce drastically. And the turnaround time and the marketability of a problem to a solution is very, very quick in such cases. Right? So this is to answer the second part of the question. The first part of the question, talent, how do we manage paucity of the talent? It's a very wide topic. Numerous upskilling, reskilling programs, making people fungible, helping people grow within the organization to have career discussion. And then this is a specific human resource intervention that we do in terms of planning and executing such plans.
Is RPA like a low code, no code solution that non-technical people can start using? And to what extent do they need technical support to either scale it up to the enterprise level? To what extent technology enables them to do it themselves?
No, you've got one of the absolute core principles correct. It is low code. And in Blue Prism's case, what we do is centrally manage it, but the development and the design is through the business users, but IT centrally manages the infrastructure. So if a client decides to deploy it on premises, obviously it's a normal IT governance on premise, but more and more clients are selecting to deploy it through the cloud. So we have a variety of those, but right from the very beginning, the design principle was it's the subject matter experts in the business who understand the processes best. So through design frameworks and the tools that it comes with, they can do a business design, no code, and it then gets created for the digital workers.
At least from Blue Prism end, it's really an intelligent automation platform, right? And when we say platform, it enables business to add in skills without codes, right? It helps them discover processes which needs to be automated without code. It helps them capture the assets, right, without a code. And it basically, even in the documentation, right, you don't need third party. There are tools within which will help you really capture the as a scenario, right? And we are getting to a stage where the automations itself can be done autonomously with minimal human intervention, right? That's where we are going to get at. And to the question about analytics, right? We have included things like process intelligence to go further down within the process and see where could be the bottleneck, right?
Okay.
Again, without a code, right? So all these things really come in handy for those business owners to really delve into the process and look it in a through a different lens and come out really cleanly in terms of how we can even reinvent those processes, right? So all this is without code. So that's how we package the platform, and the DNA is really no code.
To what extent do you see the business teams depending upon IT for everything versus wanting some kind of control in their own hands so they can dabble with a few things, maybe try it out, ask a few what if questions and get some answers without being too dependent on IT? Do they look at automation? Do they look at some other solution? How does it work for you, for Marsh as a whole?
Very interesting question. In fact, our biggest business is what we call risk management. And from a risk management perspective, we work with, it's a euphemism for working with very large clients. So when you work with Fortune 500 firms, we work with close to 70% of Nifty 50 in India. So when you work with very large clients, they don't expect a one size fits all solution when it comes to their risk solutions, their insurance programs, and so on and so forth. So it's a very great combination of having high quality individuals who are experts in certain area. So if there's an expert in vaccines, there's an expert in cyber risk, there's an expert in ESG, there's an expert in aviation. So a combination of health and benefits, marine risks and supply chain. So there's a combination of having high quality people who can do consultative sell, who can have a consultative discussion and create those custom outcomes for clients after a consultative approach, as well as dependence on some IT solution. So this schism, this whole interplay, I have seen this thing for many, many, many years. So that's point number one that I want to make. Point number two is that there are some items where we can use predictive modeling or Monte Carlo simulations, or do some kind of probabilistic analysis for them, which is all crystal ball gazing. But there are some clients who will do an override for them. So not only is this interplay between technology and human aspect comes from our perspective, this interplay of technology and human aspect comes from the clients also. So there is a lot of aspects where the clients will also veto us out, and this human aspect of a strong leader or a visionary leader or a risk manager will veto us out and say, I want a certain outcome, and I don't want to go with the stock approach of what your technology is saying.
Yes,
so that's all from my side.
What do you see as the scenario among the software development centers that so many global banks have set up in India? How are they evolving? Are they becoming more technology sophisticated? Are they becoming more business sophisticated? And what kind of numbers are all these people hiring?
I'll give you a bit of perspective because I also belong to one of those GICs.
Exactly.
Firstly, the way we started GICs were very primarily focused around doing back-end type of work. It could be on operations or it could be on IT. Slowly moving to value-added task. If you really see, the way we look at having accountable work, what we call it as accountability, which means for a specific activity or a specific process or a specific project, we continue to have the full running of it from the GICs in India. We gradually move from cost arbitrage to how we utilize the talent to the best possible way, right?
Okay.
So this has been the journey. Now we see GICs setting up from every corner of the world. Okay, you see a bank like MaxShrek setting up a GIC in Bangalore, where they want to leverage the IT talent.
If I may ask Robert to expand on this, you're talking to so many banks in Asia. Which are the other countries where you see banks setting up global centers for software or technology? And are the approaches in different countries different, or is it like a mix and match? all over the place.
From my experience in Asia Pacific, I can pretty much only mirror what Yatesh has been saying.
Okay.
Certainly from the Australian banks, the top 5 or 6, very much what early adopters, in the early 2000s. I think ANZ was the first one that went out and created a fairly significant sized, certainly for Australia, it was very large. In India's terms, maybe mid-sized, but all of the others have followed, and exactly what you said. Cost arbitrage was the first dynamic, but very rapidly, particularly as the centers became ISO certified and the whole quality aspect became so important, everybody quickly realized it's about the talent pool at a competitive price. And then as the salaries and the cost of employment rose up because of the talent in India, we did see some arbitrage to some other countries, but I think that's kind of settled back towards India now. And I think that has been driven by the quality of talent.
Are these global centers serving more of developed markets or even developing markets? For example, would a bank in Thailand set up a global, outsource work to some global center in India, or would they prefer to keep it in Thailand?
I think it's that particular country, what we've seen, lower cost in Thailand. So the cost arbitrage is not necessarily that attractive. And they tend to be a little bit behind in considering the talent pools. And I think it's just a function of they're going to go through the same cycles. But I think the impact of fintechs is having an impact on this. It's really all the developing countries, often there are fintechs emerging from there, and people are much more comfortable we're looking for where the talent and the innovation and the good ideas are coming from. So it's less about, which major countries, it's where the talent and the good ideas and innovation are. Excuse the noise, we're having a huge hailstorm and thunderstorm, yeah.
Anup, would you like to share what Marsh's strategy is in terms of putting all these IT resources into one center for global services or spreading them around?
Oh, why not? So here's my little vantage point that yes, we have a fairly large captive center in India, and it actually does not just cater to Marsh, it caters to almost all of the Marsh and McLennan companies, which is Oliver Wyman, Mercer, Guy Carpenter, as well as Marsh. So we followed the same trajectory, what has been mentioned over here, cost arbitrage, then becomes access to talent, and then becomes, kind of a replicable model of, best practices that you can have. But having said so, we also, like I said, partner with a lot of large technology outsourcing companies for custom application development, for maintenance of our systems, and remote infrastructure work, etc. So I think the big message from my side is that not everything can be the running of a captive center cannot be a panacea to all problems. No? That you just because you get labor for cheap, you can throw bodies at a problem and you can solve the problem. So my personal view is that throwing bodies at a problem is not necessarily the best solution. It could be one of the things. For some things, you need horses for courses, but for others, where you need high quality, intelligence, where you need, some kind of, items that you need to kind of, acquire to deliver a certain capability to clients. You need to kind of, either decide to kind of, build, or decide to buy, or decide to buddy up. So those are the 3 B's I see, which are there in this thing. And I have great examples of all the 3 applications. One of the best applications that in the recent past we have bought over from a company called Thompson's is a platform called Darwin. So what Darwin basically does is that you have employees, for example, Yatish's bank, which is a if we were to work with them, then ability to do a custom insurance solution for every employee. A young employee will need less of health insurance, but more of, say, personal accident. An employee who's very young may not need health insurance or personal accident insurance, may want to buy a gym membership. So the company is moved from fixed contribution from fixed benefits to fixed contribution, rather than paying $5,000 to you also, or to me also, who's, I'm on the wrong side of 40. I have probably aging parents, I have a family, I have a kid and all also. So rather than the company, spending benefits and the benefits becoming bigger and bigger and more expensive every year, and the company cost ballooning, they're saying, I will put a defined contribution, say $5,000, say $1,000 per year. You decide what you do with your money. It gives more control to employees. And the platform that I'm talking about is, exactly the same platform that we ended up choosing to buy from the market, from a company which did this job much better than what we could do. So short answer to your question is those 3 Bs that I just mentioned.
But also give us if you can share some kind of number, like Yatish mentioned, from 1,000 to 12,000 over a period of 10, 12 years. Is there some kind of trajectory you have seen for the back office in India for Marsh McLean?
It's something that we don't like to talk about, publicly. Suffice to say, it's here in Bombay, and it's a pretty big one at that. And it not only does help for, like I said, Marsh, but it does it for all the, Marsh and McLennan companies. But at the same point of time, a firm, say on an annual basis, may spend a couple of $1 billion on outsourcing also. So a lot of Indian tech firms, including BPO firms, also help us on some specific areas of business. So, there are firms in India who help us on remote infrastructure, for some on customer application development, some on the BPO work and, client, management work, etc. And of course, we use, like, for example, for our sales management and all, we may use SaaS platforms and CRM platforms like, Marshforce and all. So, or Salesforce. So the point I'm trying to make is that, I don't think so that, from an IT strategy, I'm not an IT strategy person, I'm a business facing person. But, what I see working well for us is horses for courses. There's no one size fit all.
May I ask each of you to respond to one very simple question? What is it that you wish should happen? What major transformation or should happen in 2022 that has not yet happened in 2021 and the earlier years? What is there in your wish list? Some major thing.
I think the comment was made by one of our colleagues right at the beginning, which I think is critical from a end consumer as well as an advisor to our customers, is an end-to-end approach. In many cases, the digital transformation looks at one or two of the channels or the way that a process is done, but then you still got to deal with a manual process or a 5-phase step process. So my wish list is, take that strategic view and go end to end. And I think that's going to have the most impact on both customer, agent, employee, and results impact.
So for us, what we want to be is a digital bank. Digital transformation has taken leaps and bounds, various shapes in the last 2 years, but this year is pivotal in the strategy that we are putting in place. I spoke about, the emerging tech, the local no-code platforms, how we bring in more automation, etc. This is very key for us. And what is also key will be leveraging this. How do we bring value to our parent organization? So that becomes key.
Let me, put it that way, right? I mean, it's since you said specifically 2021, 22, first thing comes in my mind is collaboration, right? I mean, it's more human, right? I think we all wish, and think some of us would have got back to the office, but I think let humans be humans, right? I mean, digital is something that is the way, it's inevitable in some sense, right? So we need to be digitally singular at some point in time. What we mean to say is that, the collaboration between humans and the digital workers and systems, etc., would be there, right? So we have to get there. But then for that, we need collaboration, we need ideation, like Yatish was saying, our cultural some things can never be, humans need to network, right? So I think we should really look at that. It's more a soft point than a hard one, but I think the journey is there. People have realized, COVID and these disruptions have really put a lot of focus on digital first strategy for across not only BFSI, right, across. So I think it's time to collaborate. It's time to put in the right strategies, bring the customer into the boardroom. Quite a few things. We need to look everything with a different lens. So that's my closing point.
Okay, so last but hopefully not the least, here's my wish for 2022. So, actionable insights on tap. As a business person, I don't care how the salami is made, what goes behind the scenes, what goes in the technology and all. What I want is that, can I take certain insights to clients and on access, on tap, and in a democratized manner. So whether it is an MD who joins our firm or an MD who's there in the firm, if we are facing the client, can there be ubiquitous access to these actionable insights and can be presented to our clients? I'll give you an example over here. Fairly large firm, we are $20 billion in professional services, income, but we place close to $60 odd billion or $70 billion worth of premiums in the market. And if we were an insurance firm, we would be probably, much bigger than the largest, or many firms out there. But we handle $350 billion worth of claims in a year, right? On a given good year. Now, when customers talk to us, they're telling us, they're asking us, give me actionable insight on what's happening on ransomware, on cyber, on, supply chain failures, on, wildfires in, California, and NatCat events, or floods, and like Robert was saying, there's a hailstorm in the Pacific and all. So they're asking us, about how to efficiently use their capital, right? How to efficiently use, their manage their downside risks. And if I were, able to, get these things from a purchase decision perspective on insurance, right to the insurance capital management, and right to the end of, the claims, which is where the rubber hits the road. I think that would be the most beautiful aspect for us.
And during the last 1 or 2 years, how much progress has been made in this?
This is the number one thing. This is the holy grail for us. This is the number one item. We every time a vendor comes to sell services to us, we ask them one question. So it's a journey.
Fantastic.
Super.
Thank you all very much. It's been an interesting conversation. I hope you all found something interesting from each other.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Good day.
Bye-bye.
Good day, all of you. Take care.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Yatish.